Okay, well, here we are. Welcome to Breaking Convention.
To thank the organizers for letting me be here. It is really an honor. Like Cameron said, I've recently moved to Australia, and my arrival in Australia coincided with the Attorney General deciding that they're going to have this big consultation. Basically, in Australia right now, they're trying to change the laws. As opposed to basing the laws on the legality of plants on taxonomic identification, what they want to do is they want to take the chemical constituents of the plants and make them illegal that way. So just as a little perspective gaining exercise, there's about 4 or 5 plants. We all know them. They're covered in the conventions, et cetera, et cetera. We've got cannabis, which was well talked about today. We've got opium poppies. We've got coca, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, by making the plants illegal by chemical constituents, we're taking those 5 or 6 plants and making them, making potentially thousands of plants illegal. For example, acacia, which I'll talk about, has DMT in it. Acacia is an Australian genus. There's 900 in the genus in Australia. So I mean, it's ridiculous. And I know that I'm preaching the converted on this one, but it's, we'll get into that more. So. I'm just going to take you through the phytotherapeutic, genomic, and ethnobotanical information on this. So this is me, Ivan Casselman. This is where I now work in Australia, Salvia University, plant science. And just to alleviate the most asked question, this is the presentation software I'm using. Okay. So is legislative change based on science? It's an easy question to answer. It's no. The government continues to sort of dupe us into thinking that they're actually basing what they do on science, but it's not. This is very clear. It's not even science, but even evidence of any kind. So I've talked to you about this new consultation in Australia, the consultation on the implementation of model drug schedules for Commonwealth. Whew, it's a big one. But base the legality of plants on taxonomic, on chemical constituents and not taxonomy. So okay, I would talk about ethnobotany a little bit. Ethnobotany is the study of how people use plants. I think that everybody's fairly familiar with that. Phytochemistry is the chemistry in plants, all the fancy alkaloids and chemicals that we use to gain a higher self. And then phylogenetics is the genetics, is DNA, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the 3 main topics that I deal with in my study. So these are this is just a little overview of some of the plants that I'm going to talk about that are going to be affected by this law. Cat, which has been mentioned today already. Salvia Divinorum is my area of expertise. I've been working with this plant for about a decade now. And then the wattle, which is the one on the end, which will also be made illegal. So I'm going to talk about the environmental costs, the social costs, the economic costs, and then I wanted to start though with making sure that everybody knows where my bias lies, and this is where my bias lies. I really do think that it's ridiculous to have laws against plants that we can grow in the garden. Now, I mean, large-scale productions and refining plant materials into concentrated products, I think the government might have a say on that. But as far as just growing stuff in our backyard, I really think we should be allowed to do it. And I think that most people would probably agree with me here. So we're talking about Salvia Divinorum now? Yeah, we've talked, yeah, I had to repeat. Okay, so we're going to talk about Salvia Divinorum. Salvia Divinorum is a short-acting hallucinogen used by the Mazateks from before European discovery, and it's a pretty amazing plant. I'm not going to get into the old ethnobotany of it, but the new ethnobotany of it is really amazing because since the 1990s, when they discovered the novel compound in there, it's integrated itself into non-Mexican use. It's available on the internet in concentrated forms. People are smoking it, and it's a pretty amazing cultural phenomenon. If you want to know more about this, ask me later. I've done a master's or 2 masters on this so far, so I know a little bit more about it than that. This is salvinorin A, a very, very, very unique chemical. It's the only known hallucinogenic diterpene, and it has a lot of potential for therapeutic use. We just need to discover a little bit more about that. This is cat. It grows in East Africa, a really important crop there. They use it like coffee. It's an everyday social activity. It creates a large amount of income for countries that generally don't have a lot of export crops. So in that respect, it's also very, very important. This is cathinone. It's the active ingredient in here. This is the phytochemistry part. It's a chemical similar to amphetamines, but it's when chewed, it's a fairly mild stimulant as opposed to amphetamines, which is really concentrated. And then this is the wattle. The acacia is a predominantly Australian genus and has a lot of ethnobotanical uses, mainly in bush food and for wood. This particular one is actually the national floral emblem of Australia. On the list to be made illegal is the floral emblem of Australia. Strange that might be the case, but this particular plant is really evidence that the Australian government did not know what they were doing when they decided to make DMT illegal, because they're going to make their national floral emblem illegal. Possibly. This is DMT. We're well acquainted with this particular molecule. It's one of the most commonly occurring hallucinogens in the plant kingdom in very small doses. So to go ahead and extract this from most plants that have DMT in it it's not a economically viable pursuit, but the Australian government decided that any plants with DMT in it might become illegal. So now we start looking about evidence. We've had a few talks about evidence-based policy. Evidence-based policy doesn't really exist, and this is a little bit of information from the Australian government. Basically, they've got 4 or 5 major drug policy reviews or drug use in Australia, and they found very, very, very low usage of naturally occurring hallucinogens. They don't even limit it down to DMT or Salvia Divinorum or anything like that. The category is so small that they just use naturally occurring hallucinogens. And out of the 4 major reports in the last 4 or 5 years, only 1 even mentioned the use of naturally occurring hallucinogen. And then, of course, nobody identifies naturally occurring hallucinogens as a problem. Everybody's going to talk about alcohol and heroin and pharmaceutical use. Now, we've seen this before. This is Dr. Nutt's famous graph. I've added 2 onto here because they were missing, DMT and Salvia Divinorum. But this just gives us an idea, like the physical harm versus dependence relationship. And all the stuff that's illegal is kind of at the top, and all the stuff that's not legal is at the bottom. But the cannabis and LSD and ecstasy and DMT and Salvia Divinorum a lot less physical harm, and the dependence is a lot less. It's a really important graph, so I think everybody should make sure that they take a look at this and kind of internalize what this says. It says that we condone plants that are safe, but make legal the plants that are not. What's next? Okay, so environmental costs. So this is really where it comes down to not thinking about policy before you start making policy. In Australia, you've got 900 different species of the wattle, and you've got things like phalaris grass, which is a common fodder for agricultural crops. You've got beautiful natural reserves filled with plants with DMT, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, are you going to make farmers dig up all their grass, the phalaris grass? Are you going to clear cut national forest reserves? Are you going to do that, really? Is that really what you're going to do? So the environmental costs were not considered at all when we're talking about this. Now, as far as economic costs go, my colleague was on a radio show, Australia, the Australian National Broadcasting Company, along with a representative of the horticultural industry. Now, the horticultural industry is really, really nervous about this because it's going to cut about half the plants that they commonly sell to Grandma and Grandpa to put in their backyard, like Bromantsia, for example, and it's going to really cut into their profits. And then, as I mentioned before, with cat, it's a really important export crop for places like Yemen. So it's going to have a lot of effect on a lot of different people. This is all the things that are listed that have acacia, or that have acacia listed as an ingredient. So as far as economics go, these things become illegal. I don't know. Nobody seems to know what's going to happen, but interesting to know nonetheless. The main constituent that's used, acacia is used for, is its gum. It's got a really nice gum in it. So, and then this is just a little bit of information from Yemen. It's economical for these people to grow cat, and it's a huge export crop for them. So when we're making national policy, it's also important to consider the international implications of this. Now, as far as social costs go, I'm going to talk about Salvia Divinorum, because Salvia Divinorum is on the cusp. We're really on the cusp of knowing what this can do. And right now, these are some of the proposed problems that we might be able to treat with Salvia Divinorum. We might be able to develop these effective therapies using this plant or using the molecule in the plant. But the more things are made illegal, the harder time we have studying this. And as academics, we get this sort of, we get to have more privilege to work with these kind of things, but it increases the amount of paperwork we have to do. We need more funding to pay more people to do more work just to get around the legal part of it. But if we can just roll up to the shop, we can buy the plant, we can start researching it, it makes our job as academics a lot easier. Where did I want to, I'm going to conclude with this. Yes, here it is. In 2007, the Journal of Natural Products reported that in the previous 25 years, over 70% of new pharmaceuticals introduced in the North American market were derived from plants. So when we're making policy on plants, we really have to remember that our medicine is still coming from plants, regardless of whether we're getting it in a little tiny white pill or we're getting it from our back garden. It's important to make sure that we have access to all of this. And then I have one more thing here, yeah. Plants have a voice, but it's a special voice that speaks to us. And in this room, well, I'm assuming that the majority of us can hear that voice. But plants don't have a voice that can engage in this policy debate. So it takes us, the people sitting in this room, and our friends, and the wider community to make sure that we ally with the plants and we speak for them. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much. Do you want questions? Or
yeah, we got time.
Okay.
We've got a couple of minutes for questions here if either wants to take any. Anybody?
Questions? Yeah, over here.
I'm from Czech Republic. We had the court case a few months ago with Salvia Divinorum, and it was made illegal like a month or something like ago. And I talked to the guys who were at the court defending Salvia, and what occurred to me from the conversation was that the judges or people at the court didn't listen to any reasons, to any argument. They were just repeating the plant or the substance changes consciousness, and that's why it should be illegal, you know. And that was the main reason why it was made illegal.
Yeah, and everyone in this room will agree that that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But yeah. Yeah, we're seeing more and more laws against Salvia Divinorum, which is unfortunate, because a lot of it's based on this. Well, I did my master's on Salvia Divinorum in YouTube and the Ethnobotanical realm of that, and it seems that a lot of this new policy is based on media hype as opposed to actual fact and information. So it's a shame, but hopefully we can change the tides with conferences like this. One more question? Yeah, in the back in the green.
In the UK, cat is used traditionally by Somali in the diaspora and East African diaspora, and that's been part of the reason why the government has kind of allowed it to remain legal, because they see those problems kind of confined to this community. Is that the same situation in Australia in any way? Has that affected the legislation debate?
With cat, there's not as large of an African population, especially on the East Coast, a bit more on the West Coast. And Australia in general has a lot harsher laws or they're much more protectionist against plants coming in to Australia. So I don't know if it's really linked with the fact that cat is chewed by African communities. I think it more has to do with plants are coming from outside of the country in, and I think that's really where the restriction comes from. Yeah, well, there's just not a very large populations of that use cat in Australia. Do you have one more question, or do you want?
Yeah, one more.
Okay. Cameron says one more question, so one more question. Yeah.
What's the evidence for salvia RNA having therapeutic benefit in schizophrenia?
Schizophrenia? No, it's just salvia RNA has the potential. The chemical makeup of salvia RNA has the potential to be developed into therapies for disorders that distort the perception. Schizophrenia being one of them, Parkinson's being one of them. There's a whole list of disorders right now that are treated with. I keep on tripping over this. Treated with pharmaceuticals that just dull out the brain. Basically, they don't help. They don't enhance people's lives. But the potential for this molecule to be developed into that is high. Right now, only very limited research on that. So the next decade is really going to see what happens with this plant. So, okay, thank you very much, everybody.